Hello, I'm Cris Hardaway. Welcome to this edition of The Best Times, a series that looks at life after 50. The National Center on Elder Abuse estimates that between 1 and 2 million older adults, nearly 10% of the elderly population, suffer some form of elder abuse each year. And that's just an educated guess because only 1 out of 23 cases are actually reported. Elder abuse is largely an invisible crime. Too often victims remain silent, and too often they and their relatives feel that no one is there to help them. But last year, a Plow Foundation grant enabled the formation of the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse Team, or CREA. Tonight we examine the work that CREA has done and the work that remains in combating elder abuse. On a Wednesday morning, a large group of professionals gather for a training session. These individuals and the diverse agencies they represent are the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse Team. CREA unites law enforcement agencies, healthcare organizations, and legal and victims services in one collaboration aimed at reducing the problem of elder abuse in our community, which can take the form of physical, financial, emotional or sexual abuse, neglect, and even self-neglect. Bonnie Brandel, a nationally recognized expert in the area of elder abuse, is leading the training session. She knows how serious the problem is.
It's a very serious problem nationwide. As 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day for the next 16 years, the number of older adults in this country is expanding and exploding in ways that we have never, as a country, seen before.
The PowerPoint presentation gives way to a practical exercise as Bonnie leads the group in a real-life demonstration of the hard choices that victims of abuse often face. The pathway to help is available, but it can be difficult to navigate, and those who are there to help are often hindered by the fact that elder abuse can be difficult to identify and prove.
Elder abuse cases are extremely complicated, and often an older victim is touching a number of systems. Law enforcement may have been the first to come out and visit the home. They may have called Adult Protective Services. The older victim may be engaged with one or more healthcare providers. Maybe a civil attorney could be helpful in terms of getting a protective order. Maybe they need a place to stay and need emergency shelter and victim services. And so typically all of these different agencies have worked in their own silos and had their own case, and because of confidentiality or not even knowing what the other person is doing, they've worked very separately. And so what we found across the country is that collaboration in these cases can be hugely effective, both in looking at individual cases and having providers who are working on the same case come together and do case review with signed releases by the victim, so the victim knows that these conversations are happening and that one case plan can come together for that older adult and one care coordinator is working with that older victim. And that's part of the CREA model that I think is particularly strong and we're seeing effective across the country.
In 2015, CREA served 187 clients. 2/3 of CREA's clients were female, with the largest group being African American women. The ages served ranged from 60 to over 95. Abuse types covered a broad range, and the services that victims received were tailored to their specific need. More than 1/3 of CREA's cases in 2015 have been resolved. One such case is that of Bernice and Eddie Love. Bernice and Eddie are soulmates. Listen to what their daughter says about them.
Have you ever seen the movie The Notebook? Because my dad and stepmom are the African-American versions of The Notebook. They literally are. And their interaction is what gives them a better quality of life.
Bernice and Eddie are both 86 years old. Bernice has Alzheimer's. Eddie's mind is sharp, but his eyes are failing him. So certified nursing assistants care for them in their home on a daily basis, and a local family member tends to their finances. One day, Carolyn, who lives 500 miles away in Indiana, received a disturbing phone call from their CNA. A letter had arrived notifying Bernice and Eddie of impending foreclosure proceedings against their home because of failure to pay their taxes.
And I was appalled when she read it, because my dad and I had had conversations many times before, and I would ask him, I said, Daddy, did you pay this? Did you pay that? Because, you know, this is due here and so forth. And he would say, oh yes, it's being taken care of. And I had no reason to doubt, so therefore I went along with it. Well, when now the CNA is reading this letter to me, I realized that none of that has indeed been taken care of.
Bernice and Eddie were victims of financial abuse and neglect, and the abuser was a family member.
It's unfortunate that anyone would do anything harmful to senior citizens because they are so vulnerable, and especially a senior citizen who's aged and visually impaired and someone close to you. And yet, I think a person may not be in his or her right mind or heart to do something like that. So we forgive them and we move forward, but we also take measures so that that does not reoccur.
Carolyn came to Memphis, and with the help of BeLinda Bryan of the Family Safety Center, she was able to straighten out the tax situation and save her parents' home. Through the collaborative agencies of CREA, Carolyn was also able to get legal services to give her power of attorney and draft a written will for her parents. She also obtained additional health care services for her father, who now required a more extensive level of care. But even more importantly, CREA gave Carolyn peace of mind.
When I leave, I can leave with peace of mind, knowing that CREA and all of their extensive social services and medical attendants will be able to have my parents in a safe environment, that I can come and see them, I can lie down at night with rest and assurance, knowing that they're getting the best care that they can. And that makes me feel very, very comfortable and at peace.
This story of financial abuse and neglect by a family member is a very typical scenario that occurs all too often. Carolyn says we should all learn from her cautionary tale.
Whenever it happens, whether you are watching it on television that someone has been taken advantage of, or whether you are the recipient, it's still painful to know that people can be so harmful to others. And especially, as I say, it's like taking candy from a baby.
What you've just seen is one of CREA's success stories. But to find out more about the ways that the partners in CREA are working to support our senior population, I invited 4 guests who are part of the CREA team into the studio. Melanie Keller is President and CEO of Meritan. Marlene Siegel is Administrator at Ave Maria Home. And Chassity Taylor and BeLinda Bryan are Care Coordinators at the Family Safety Center. We've just seen the story of Bernice and Eddie Love and Carolyn's predicament, but I'm interested in finding out more from the two of you about how you helped Carolyn. What did you do?
Okay. Well, there was a case that was assigned to me initially. Basically going into the home, trying to identify what the needs were and already what services were in the home, and sitting down with the daughter, Ms. Thompson, and making about 4 or 5 phone calls while I was in the home to access services, to follow up with the care provider for the insurance for the mother and also for the father, because they had different insurance, different providers, to try to put them in the system as well and trying to coordinate the services. And part of that was just to increase the services at the time because they had services in the home, but there was a gap. They came in the morning, then there was a gap in the afternoon, and then they were picked up in late afternoon, evening hours. So that was part of it with the insurance, to try to increase the hours in the home for health care. but also making the necessary phone calls in regard to legal services so she can gain the power of attorney for her father and understand what rights, if any, she would have, because the wife in the situation was her stepmother. And she has adult children who she wasn't sure at the time if they wanted to be involved. But she wanted to make sure she covered all the bases in the time frame that she had in the home.
Now could this kind of scenario have happened with Carolyn before CREA? I mean, what would she have done if this had happened before CREA existed?
She probably definitely would have been at a loss, and she would have had to devote more time, if possible, to be here and be in the home for probably an extended period of time to try to get everything done. Because unfortunately, she didn't know who to call in regards to the insurance. And if she just called a 1-800 number and began to tell the story, by the time she was transferred to maybe 4 or 5 people to get to the actual person who she needs to speak with, she probably would have had to leave a message and hope that that person returned the call. And she would have to do that 5 or 6 different times with 5 or 6 different agencies, which would have left her at a loss, and of course the couple at more of a loss, and sent her home heartbroken.
Now, Bernice and Eddie are a case of neglect and financial abuse. Chassity, you've got a story of physical abuse.
Yes, we had CREA assisted a gentleman. He was residing in an unlicensed care home. Anytime you have 4 or more individuals, you should have a license. In this particular home, there were about 7 to 8 individuals living in this home. A lot of them were mental health consumers as well. But this particular gentleman, he didn't have any family of any sort. What he explained to me is that he was in the hospital, and upon discharge, he had nowhere to go. And so a gentleman came by and offered services, a place to stay, and said that he was providing a care home, and so he went to reside with him. My client shared with me that during his time at this care home, this person that owned the care home took all of his finances, his food stamps, his Social Security card, his identification, and everything. He was eating hot dogs and dry cereal every day. So when we heard of this, CREA came on the scene and we assisted that client to go to emergency housing. CREA is blessed to have Meritan that was able to provide that emergency housing for him about 2 months. During that period of time, we had to work to regain all of his identification, Social Security card, and all of that, because before he could even look into long-term housing, you had to have an identification card, Social Security, ID. And so, of course, because his birth certificate was in Nashville, it took a period of time to get those documents back. And then we had, everything depends on another entity. So we had to get the birth certificate, we had to get the Social Security card, proof of income, in order for the housing coordinator with Meritan to even begin to try to look at long-term placement. But we were able to secure those long-term housing. He's living in a senior high-rise, and he's doing very, very well, and he's living independently.
How many different agencies were involved in that solution?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you got law enforcement?
We had law
services?
Enforcement, we had the Hospitality Hub, Social Security Administration, Meritan, APS. There were just a lot of entities that came together.
And again, a situation that, you know, if that situation had occurred a few years ago, what would have been the storyline?
He probably would have remained there. He probably would have died early on because, of course, he was, first of all, he was an insulin-dependent diabetic. During that particular time we came on the scene, we had to call the ambulance, and his sugar level was 400. He hadn't had any of his medication in over 6 months. So, I mean, it really could have been devastating for him.
Well, let's talk about how serious the problem is. I know it's difficult to quantify because the statistics that we have are very difficult to get good statistics because elder abuse is largely unreported or underreported at best. But from your experiences, how serious is the problem in this area?
Well, we've served 266 people since CREA services started in January of last year.
Yes.
So that's a fairly large number. I know the national statistics, 1 in 10 seniors are a victim of elder abuse, and maybe 1 in 14 cases go reported. So, I mean, if you're looking at 266 that have been reported that we've served, and you multiply that out by, you know, the 13 that maybe haven't, that's a pretty significant number.
And I would imagine the story here in Memphis is probably the same across the country at any major city, major community.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let me talk about and try to explain how CREA functions. I'm interested in finding out how each one of your organizations functions within CREA. What do you do? Let's just start with the Family Safety Center. What's their role?
Well, the Family Safety Center is simply where we're housed. And of course, we're funded by the Plow Foundation. And initially, if there is a referral made to the office, we're like the hub, Chassity and I, because we're the care coordinators. And a referral comes in and we dispatch an advocate out to the home, to the hospital if it's a care home. Sometimes she escorts the police as well. She goes into the environment, completes an assessment, and at that point she identifies the needs or the services that the person is seeking. And that information is brought back to us and shared. And we begin at that point to make the phone calls, make the referrals, identifying what the services are, the need, because sometimes the situation, just as Chassity explained, where there's a dire need, where we need things to move pretty quickly. And I think that's part of what makes us so unique with CREA, is because even before, there were a lot of agencies that existed to provide services to this population, but there was no cross communication. There was no relationship between all the agencies, and that's something that we all have.
The teamwork aspect
Yes.
of things. Meritan, how does Meritan fit into this?
We have a home care agency, and we also have homemaker services, and we have a social worker dedicated to CREA for housing. And what happens is we would either get a referral from Chassity or BeLinda or one of the victims' advocates. We have on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we could get the call from the advocate at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they may say, we need a nursing assessment, we need a physician to come by, we need housing, homemakers, what have you. And we have a response time of generally less than 8 hours. And we'll send the nurse out to do an assessment and determine if there are any ongoing needs, like the gentleman that hadn't had insulin, and we coordinated and picked up all his medications. We work with the insurance companies to try to get as much services as the person qualifies for covered under insurance. It might be that they need some homemaker services, so we would send some support out there to help in the home till we could get them enrolled in a long-term program. The housing, we have a social worker that helps with long-term housing, whether that's the temporary emergency housing and then the long-term housing. And then sometimes they're just simple referrals, like today the fire department called and said we need a bedside commode, and we have a large amount of medical equipment that was donated to us. So we're working with our CREA partners, and sometimes it's just a matter of a simple piece of equipment and they stop by and pick it up, and that can help someone.
And what about Ave Maria?
We provide emergency housing. Sometimes there have been situations where someone had nowhere to go and needed either a higher level of care for nursing home care, or we also have apartments that we can offer an individual, and coordinated with the Family Safety Center care coordinators, we've provided long-term housing for a few people in the community who could benefit from getting out of an unfortunate situation into immediate emergency housing until other options could be arranged.
Now, we talked about teamwork. You had mentioned teamwork. All of your organizations, all of the other organizations of CREA have existed for years. So what hasn't existed to solve the problem? Why did it take this? The coordination, is that the secret to making this work?
Definitely.
Definitely.
The collaboration,
Yes.
and we meet every other week.
And we discuss cases.
We talk about cases. We have the face-to-face interaction, and BeLinda or Chassity may bring a couple of cases to the group that they need some input from, but we all kind of catch up. And thanks to the Plow Foundation for the funding piece that pushed us all together.
Right.
And
So before it was almost like the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing.
exactly.
Exactly.
Yes. And we've learned so much from each other in the services that each agency provides.
Well, abuse doesn't discriminate. It's not one zip code, it's not one socioeconomic class, it's not one race, it's not one gender. And I think having a consolidated group where we all know what services we can put that person in contact with, as opposed to that person's family or them having to go from agency to agency to agency around town, has really made a tremendous difference.
Yes.
Let's talk about CREA, which it's been working now for over a year. What's your assessment? How well is it performing?
Oh,
It's exceeding my expectations. I
Really?
think that's a good thing.
We have success stories that we celebrate at almost every meeting, and we clap and we get enthusiastic about it, and people are so much more aware.
right.
And I think that's evident in the referrals.
Where do you think you're really making a difference?
Oh.
Are there particular areas you can identify?
I think we're helping them maintain independence.
Yeah.
And I think anytime you can come into a senior's life and they're able to stay in their home, and we've provided services for them to stay in their home, I think we're winning all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we even have a couple of examples of people we provided emergency housing to, and they liked the families that they were staying with so much that that's become long-term relationships, and they're living there now, and it's people in the community kind of reaching out and helping each other, and those have just been absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
And I think we hear about initial safety, that for the first time in a period of time, the victim is feeling safer.
Yeah.
Or as Carolyn said, at peace.
And peace.
Yeah.
It was at peace. Are there areas where you feel like you need to improve as you move forward?
Well, I think we always struggle with the housing piece.
Yes.
Because even though we have services or resources for it, it's always more that we need.
Right.
It's always
That emergency housing to get
Emergency
people
housing.
out of an abusive situation and into a safe place.
Well, and I think even more so than the emergency housing, because we haven't really had the challenge recently with the emergency housing. It's getting the long term to move quickly enough.
Right.
You have to, for Ave Maria and their skilled facility, you have to meet certain requirements, and you have to jump through all the insurance hoops and so forth and so on. So of course, different levels of care require different qualifications. But even some of the low-cost senior housing, by the time you track down birth certificates and track down Social Security cards and all this information that somebody needs. I mean, you're 2 months into somebody being in temporary emergency housing while you go through all the red tape. And to have clean, safe, low-cost housing is also a challenge.
Let's talk about the future. What do you think the future of CREA is? I know financially you've got a 3-year grant. This is year number 2 that you're in. Where do you see it going beyond this?
I would say if the funding is not renewed, that's the multi-million-dollar question. I know that there's efforts to look at other sources, other grants. I would like to personally see it be something that the state or local government understands the importance of and funds. And we've tried to be very good stewards of all of the resources. Anytime that we provide a service that we can possibly bill a third-party payer for, insurance, what have you, we do that instead of tapping into the grant funding, because we want this to be sustainable. We want this to last. And regardless of if the finances are there going forward for us to have an official hub, I know in my heart and in my head that the relationships have been created and are continuing to get stronger. And so we will have that collaboration. We will have that coordinated response, even if it's not formal later on.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being on The Best Times and discussing this very important topic of elder abuse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
as
you.
well.
Under Tennessee law, everyone is a mandatory reporter. If you suspect an older adult is being abused, call the Adult Protective Services hotline. In an emergency, always call 911 first. Funding for The Best Times is provided by